money supply, and things like that. So what we're going to look at today is money demand. And then see how all of this ties into policy. See how the Federal Reserve uses all of this stuff to change interest rates and impact the economy and whatnot. That goes there. That goes there. This goes here. So let's look at the demand for money. And it's just like the demand curve for any other good or service. So we have our interest rate here, and we've got our quantity of money, right? We have some money demand function here. And let's think about what we mean by this when we're talking about the demand for money, right? We know that we've got some amount of wealth, right? And we've got these assets. And we want to think, what percent do I want to hold as money? That's in essence the question that we're looking at, right? I mean, because I've got assets in the form of a home, cars, furniture, stocks, etc. Right? Here's these assets. And it's a matter of, okay, what set of these assets, how much of these assets do I want to hold as cash, and what of these assets do I want to hold and this wealth in the form of home or cars or furniture or whatever, right? So when we have this relatively low interest rate here, I'm just making up a number here, say 2%. Right? We're going to have some money demand here, some quantity of money that people want to buy out here, right? As the interest rate goes up, say 10%, right, we're going to have some other different quantity of money that it is that we desire to hold, right? And for obvious reasons. This interest rate is in essence the opportunity cost, right? Because if we're holding these assets in the form of money, money doesn't earn any interest. The only thing that earns interest and grows is things like, stocks and home, and your cars don't, they depreciate in value, but things like that. You've got these other assets that you can take your money and convert them into that could grow at some rate of, say, 10% or 2%. Well, at 2%, you're not missing out on that much to hold these assets in the form of cash balances. At 10%, you are, and you want to hold less money, right? So let's look at some of the reasons for holding money, right? Well, the first one, of course, is this idea of transactions demand. Right? Recall that we need to have, in essence, dollars or euros or yen or whatever currency it is that we're looking at in order to conduct transactions. So we see here that there's a certain amount of money that you need just to be able to conduct the daily transactions of life. And you'll notice here that as output increases, transactions demand is going to increase. Right? You need more of those dollars to conduct those transactions. It's the exact same thing for the price level. Right? If we see these increases in the price level, we're going to see transactions demand go up. People are going to want to hold more of their assets in the form of cash. Right? We also have precautionary demand. Where people in essence want to hold cash in case of an emergency. So think about it like this, right? Let's assume that there's only one thing that I have wealth invested in, and that's my home. All right, so here's the house, right? And there's some amount of wealth. I'm just making up a number. There's some amount of wealth in here, $100,000. There's no other cash. I have no cash. There's nothing in the bank account. There's nothing in the savings account. There's nothing in my wallet. It's all in the house. It should be obvious you're going to need some cash in order to conduct daily transactions, right? I'm not going to be able to do anything. I can't go to Walmart and say, well, I got $100,000, but I can't give it to you yet because it's in the house, right? That's not going to work. They're not going to give us groceries and stuff. Same thing here for precautionary demand. If there's some emergency for whatever reason, one of the cars breaks down, it can be anything that you want it to be, right? So here you have some emergency where you need cash, right? So you say, okay, car breaks down, or a kid breaks their leg, or etc. How am I going to pay for that, right? I have no way to do that. And even if I did, I've got the money here in the house. How am I going to get it out, right? So if I want to get this money, my wealth, out of the house, I want to convert the wealth I have in the house, convert it into cash, what am I going to have to do? Sell the house. Well, how long can that take? Months. Years sometimes. Right? Even if you find a buyer quickly, it can take months. And then you got to pick up all your stuff and move it all out of the house, right? It's not practical. It's not practical to hold all of your wealth in your home, or all of your wealth in stocks, or all of your wealth in antique furniture or whatever, right? So we have some precautionary demand, right? People want to hold cash in case of emergencies. Third one here is speculative demand. Right, so here with speculative demand, people want to hold cash in case there's an opportunity to buy some asset at low prices, right? So a stock, or oil, or Bitcoin, or a house, or whatever it is that you want it to be, right? You've got some asset it is that you want to purchase. It's a great price, and you want to be able to do that. Well, let's go back to this example. Let's assume all the wealth is tied up in the house, and you say to yourself, there's a great opportunity to buy some stock that you think is cheaply priced. Well, in order to get your wealth out of the house, in order to convert it into cash to be able to buy the stock, you're going to have to sell the house. That could take months or years. And by the time you've done that, that good value may have gone. So you want to be sure that you have some cash for these speculative demands. So let's combine these two guys together, right? Because we know that when we're looking at our supply of money, we had our supply of money was just some number. It's just some number in some given time frame, right? So here's our quantity of money. Here's our interest rate. Here's our money demand. Here's our money supply, right? The money supply is set by the Federal Reserve Bank. Now, you'll recall when we were talking about the gold standard. you would have this gold that people would have, and they would deposit it in some bank. Right, so here's Alpha Bank, right? They've got this gold, they're going to deposit it in this bank, right? And then the Alpha Bank gives them a little piece of paper that says this is worth, they deposit $10 worth of gold, and they're going to get this little piece of paper from Alpha Bank that says this is redeemable for $10 in gold. That little piece of paper has the name Alpha Bank on it. And if you go onto Google and you type in old bank reserve, old bank notes, or whatever it is that you want to come up with, every bank issued their own currency. So if you took this $10, this other person over here takes their $10 in gold and they deposit it here in Beta Bank, they're going to get a little $10 bill that says this note is redeemable for $10 in gold coin at Beta Bank. Now let's assume you've got a wide distance here between these two. I mean, it can be hundreds of miles, 20 miles, 50 miles, 100 miles, 500 miles. It can be any distance that you want it to be. And you've got this little piece of paper here, and you want to go to this store, and it's got $10 in Beta Bank. How does this store owner know that if he goes to Beta Bank, he can take that $10 piece of paper and actually get $10 worth of gold out of it? Because the bank here has an incentive, just like with that fractional reserve system that we saw earlier, they have an incentive to issue more currency than what they actually have gold for. So what happens if everybody takes their currency, their $10 bill notes, and they all go back to Beta Bank and they say, I want my $10 in gold, and the bank can't do that, right? Or the same thing here. You can have the exact same situation happening over here, where this person right here can take his little note that says $10 from Alpha Bank, and he can go to the store. How does the store know that if they give them the goods and services and they're getting a piece of paper in exchange, that that piece of paper actually means anything? You see what I'm saying? You can't. And in fact, the farther away you would get from a bank, the less goods and services that that piece of paper would exchange for. Because if you're over here in Springfield, Missouri, and here it is, you deposited your $10 into First Springfield Bank, and then you take and you get on your horse and buggy and you go all the way up to Kansas City and you take your dollars, your $10, and you want to spend it at the store up here. If that store wants that gold, it has to take that piece of paper all the way back to Springfield to get its $10 worth of gold. There's a transactions cost that's being incurred. There's also no way for the store to know if the bank actually has the gold. And on top of that, there's no way for the store to know if the note is even valid. Maybe it's completely counterfeit. So, you had at one time 10,000 different notes that were moving between the country, right? So you guys know when you get a dollar and you look at that dollar and you can wonder, well, is this guy counterfeit or is this not counterfeit? Now imagine there's 10,000 of different types of notes from all kinds of banks all over the place. You have no way of knowing which one's good and which one's not. The value of your $10 is really, really good here in Springfield, but as you go farther and farther away, it becomes worth less and less. You take this $10 note here to the store here, he might say, I've never heard of that, I'm only going to give you $5 worth of goods and services for it. And he's going to give $5 for this one. He's going to give $7.50 for this one. He's going to give $8 for this one. Gamma Bank up here, which is way up in like northern Dakota, he'll give $2 for that $10 note. I mean, think about all the different transactions. You have no way of knowing what you're actually going to get with your money, right? A really high transactions cost. So the Federal Reserve came along. It is a semi-public central bank, right? It is not a government agent. I don't even have my wallet with me. Gosh, I meant to bring my wallet. Who's got a piece of paper? Who's got a dollar bill, $5 bill, $10 bill, anything? If you look at this guy, what are these notes? What does that say? Federal?
Yeah, Reserve note.
Federal Reserve note, right? It's a bank. Don't let me forget to give this to you, by the way. It's a bank that basically says it's not going to be based upon here or Alpha Bank or Gamma Bank or First Springfield Bank. There's one bank. It's the Federal Reserve Bank that is issuing these notes. You don't have to know, oh, okay, I'm at Springfield Bank, because it wouldn't say First Springfield Bank, $20 note. Beta Bank, $10 note. Alpha Bank, $5 note. Gamma Bank, $1 note, redeemable for $1, right? And I mean, you can see on here, it's signed by the Treasury, but it's not issued by the government. This is not a government-issued currency. It is a currency that is issued by a bank where people said, this is ridiculous, this doesn't work. This doesn't work in a modern economy where you want to have transactions where people are mobile and people are doing different things. That system doesn't work anymore. You can't have 10,000 different notes that people are constantly trying to look up to see if they're legitimate or not. We need one. We need, in essence, a Federal Reserve Bank. And the Federal Reserve was founded basically in 1913. Partially due because you had all of these panics, right? You had panics in 1897, 1893. We were getting to the point where we're having all these different types of panics. You had another one in 1907 where people are saying, look, I don't believe the notes that Beta Bank is issuing anymore. I don't believe the notes that Alpha Bank is issuing anymore. When I go to them, I don't believe I can get the money. So people would go to Beta Bank and they would say, give me my $10, give me my gold. And they would say, we don't have it. So that means the piece of paper that people are holding is now what? Worthless, right? So now they're holding worthless pieces of paper. You would have these panics where people are saying, well, if the notes at Beta Bank are bad, maybe the notes at Alpha Bank are bad. So people go to Alpha Bank and they want to get all their money out. They want to get the gold out. And Alpha Bank now has a run on its bank, right? So the federal government said this is ridiculous. We're going to create this quasi-public, quasi-private bank, the Federal Reserve Bank. You're the ones that issue notes. It's backed by the full faith and credit of the Federal Reserve Bank. It's not backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. It's the Federal Reserve Bank. And the Federal Reserve Bank can create money basically out of thin air. All they have to do is essentially print it. You can actually go to the Federal Reserve Bank in Kansas City and you can see all the money coming in. Same thing in St. Louis, right? So you've got all of these different branches of the Federal Reserve Bank, and they're each responsible for kind of making sure that there's liquidity within their own individual divisions, their own little individual markets. So you actually have a decentralized, centralized bank, right? There's actually 12 different banks. So you have a Federal Reserve Bank in New York, you have a Federal Reserve Bank in Boston, you have a Federal Reserve Bank in Richmond, you have a Federal Reserve Bank in Atlanta, you have one in Cleveland, Kansas City, St. Louis, San Francisco, Dallas, Minneapolis, I'm missing a couple. But, so you have these different banks, right? So when the Federal Reserve sets the money supply, they just set it. They just said the money supply is X, right? And they have this mandate where they are in essence mandated to try to have as much stability as they possibly can, to keep employment as large as they can, to keep inflation as low as they can. And at this money supply level, you have some interest rate here that exists. Whatever this is, it can be, say, 5%. Okay. If they increase the money supply, well, let's have that be an increase. Let's do it in green. If we have this increase in the money supply, bless you, we'll have some interest rate here of, say, 3%, right? And at this 3% level, the quantity demanded of money is going to increase. If interest rates are going down, investment is going to go up. Consumption will increase. As people say, hey, the car loan was 5%, now the car loans are 3%, they're more likely to buy a car. The exact opposite happens if they decrease the money supply. All right, so here the interest rate maybe is, say, 8%. Well, at 8%, so here's our decrease. At 8%, investment goes down. You've got consumption going up, consumption going down. People say, hey, it's 8%, I'm not going to buy the car. Right? Hey, at 8%, I don't want to have my money in cash. I want to put my money into my savings account. I don't want to hold it. Right? And so you see economic activity basically decline. So go all the way back to our GDP guy here. Right, our price of our apples times our apples, and our, I can't remember what we had B as, and our computers and our, whatever D was, I don't remember. It was too long ago. Right? But when we're seeing interest rates go up, hey, I want to buy less of this stuff. If we're seeing interest rates go down, hey, I want to buy more of this stuff, right? Consumption of these things increases. GDP goes up. Same thing here if you're looking at this from the Keynesian model. Remember the Keynesian model. You had our aggregate expenditures, our C plus I plus G plus X minus M, right? If interest rates are increasing, this guy's going down, this guy's going down. If interest rates are going down, this guy's going up, this guy's going up, making this guy go up, right? So you'll recall that we were looking at these changes in aggregate demand from our different models. So that we would have our real output, our price level over here. All right, so here you are, you're just at some output level, just say Y1, you're at some price level, say PL1. When we see these changes over here, they impact interest rates, and those changes in interest rates can make aggregate demand do this or make aggregate demand do this. In other words, it's not just fiscal policy that moves these aggregate demand curves. We can have changes in the money supply that also changes the aggregate demand curves. So let's see how the Fed does this, right? And let's remember our quantity theory of money that we've talked about previously. Right, remember this was our money supply, and we've talked about this before. This was our velocity. This was our price level. And this was our output. So that we said, hey, basically, in essence, what you've got here is nominal GDP equal to this money supply times how many times each of those dollars is going to be used, right? The only way that we can have more transactions here is if there are more dollars or those dollars are getting used faster, if the velocity is increasing, right? Well, the velocity doesn't change very much. Changes in velocity are pretty small, and they're slow to change, right? Which means when you have these changes in the money supply, that's when you're going to have these changes over here in this, right? So if we have these increases here and this guy's staying constant, we're going to see these changes here in our nominal GDP. But you'll recall, we said this guy is our real output. And what determines real output? We've talked about this from like day 2. What are the determinants of real output? The quantity and quality of resources and the level of technology. What do any one of these guys have to do with money? Do little pieces of paper make people suddenly smarter? Do little pieces of paper suddenly make us know how to turn the sun into electricity? Do little pieces of paper suddenly make factories show up? No. So ultimately, changing the money supply here can only change what in the long run? Exactly. That's why we say that inflation, there's a saying that says inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon. It's completely created by printing paper. That's what it is. Because the quantity and quality of resources and our level of technology ultimately have nothing to do with the number of green pieces of paper that exist in the economy. All that the green pieces of paper do is just make it easier to make transactions, to store value from one period to another, to measure the different prices of different goods and services relative to each other. That's all that it does. It doesn't actually create anything in and of itself. So let's see how the Fed changes the money supply, because we know that ultimately it's going to change basically the level of prices in the long run. But we can have some short-run changes. So let's see what we're doing here with these different things, right? We've got our Federal Reserve, and they essentially have 3 primary ways that they change the money supply. One of these is going to be the discount window, right? The discount window is, in essence, the rate that the Fed charges banks for loans. So you'll recall that we have this fractional reserve system. Talked about this last time. Banks can keep as much on reserve as they want to. They can have reserves of 100% if they want to, but nobody does. They have this required reserve. If they have reserves above that, those would be considered excess reserves. And they can hold those if they want to. There's nothing that says that they can't hold excess reserves. So here's this bank. Let's just make the simplifying assumption that the required reserve ratio is 10%. People have made $100 million in deposits. And the bank, therefore, has $10 million on reserve. Let's assume they don't have any excess reserves. They've been able to lend all of it out. Now let's assume $20 million worth of people come. Right? You can make this be any number. You can make it be 100 people each depositing $1 million. 20 people go to the bank one day and say, I want my $1 million back. Okay, well, we have $10. We have $10 million literally on cash in the vault that we can give you. Where are they going to get the other $10 million from? Yeah, exactly. Hey, we need to borrow $10 million real quick because we've got $100 million in deposits. We didn't keep any excess reserves because we don't have to keep any excess reserves. We lent out $90 million, 20 million people, $20 million worth of people have shown up and say, we want our 20 million bucks back. We're going to have to wait on those loans. We're going to have to call in the loans or foreclose on them or whatever it is that we're going to do, whatever the arrangement was with the note. But in the short time, we need our 10 million bucks, right? So we have our discount window here. So you can see if the interest rate here goes up, banks don't want to have to go borrow money, right? And so they're going to hold more. They're less likely to loan. They're going to have higher levels of reserves. You're going to see the money supply decreasing, right? They're not going to lend out as much. If interest rates go down, hey, if it's really, really cheap to borrow money, if I guess wrong, and I don't think $20 million worth is going to show up on any one day to get withdrawn, but I guess wrong, and interest rates are really, really low, then forget it. Who cares? Go ahead and make the notes. Go ahead and make the loans to people, right? Yeah, here's $90 million worth of loans because if I guess wrong and I need to borrow from the Fed, it's not going to cost me that much, right? So we see if interest rates going down, we're going to see the money supply increase. We have our reserve ratio. We can change this required reserve ratio. All right, so if we increase the reserve ratio, then what do you think is going to happen to the money supply? They have to hold more on reserve. Exactly. If this reserve ratio goes down, you're going to see the money supply increase. They don't change this very often for obvious reasons, right? That would be difficult. The primary way they do it is through open market operations. This is the buying and selling of government bonds. Right? And it's really, really easy to see if it's going up or if it's going down, depending upon whether they're buying or whether they're selling. Here's you. You have a bond. Here's the Fed. If they buy bonds, the bond is coming this way, and what's coming this way? What do they give me in exchange for the bond? Cash. They give me money. So if they're buying bonds, you're going to see the money supply increase, right? Because now I don't have pieces of paper. I can't take the bond to Walmart and buy groceries with it. But I can take the cash. On the other hand, if I've got money and they sell me bonds, well, I used to have green pieces of paper that I could take to Walmart and use to buy groceries. Now I have a piece of paper that's a U.S. savings bond. I can't take the piece of paper, the savings bond, to Walmart and get groceries with that. So if they sell bonds, the money supply goes down. And what we'll see on Friday, we will get done with everything by Friday. So we got done with stuff faster today than I thought we would. So that's good. So we will have our test Monday. Okay.